talk to you about how you should be pivoting your businesses first and foremost. Then let me go back all the way to COVID. Prior to COVID, it was about an 80-20 world where 80% of business was done by about 20% of agents. COVID switched that. It moved it to about a 90-10 world. After COVID, about 90% of the deals were done by about 10% of agents. And that's because people couldn't do face-to-face stuff. So the agents that had money and could market and do it real well, which were teams and big agents, got more of the business. With that said, a lot of people thought after COVID it would go backwards, but it's actually changing. It's actually getting more that way. It is last year, 93% of transactions was done by 7% of agents. So, and it's only trending that way. And now we have NAR on top of that coming down the pike. And when NAR comes in, it's gonna make all of us have to do a buyer presentation essentially to secure a buyer, because you're going to have to get them to agree to some sort of potential payment of commission to you out of their pocket before that you actually service those clients as a buyer, right? And so you're gonna have to get really good at doing a buyer presentation. Those are different. We've already had some last team meeting. We had Rich and Jake get on about how they work with their clients and do buyer presentations. So we're going to continually put that out there to you. This is going to be more about how to process the forms. But I want to prognosticate a few things. One is NAR is still projecting that they're going to go to the associations and ask for a change of forms in July. They keep saying that. We'll see if that actually happens. What that's going to mean is if MetroList adopts, which I guarantee they will because they want to prevent the liability, they can't opt into the settlement that NAR does unless they adopt the rules. So MetroList is going to adopt the rules. I guarantee it, right? So if that means they're going to require a buyer broker agreement for every buyer you're servicing. So let's talk about where that interacts, and Bruce can go into a little more detail on that. But when you start doing real estate activities on behalf of the client, on a buyer, you are now an agent. You need the doc. You need the doc signed. You need a buyer broker agreement signed. So with that said, you got to get really good at getting to a buyer presentation. If you're using your lockbox access as a way to generate your value to get with clients saying, I can open a home for you, I can do these things for you, and that's your value proposition as an agent for their buyers, then you are going to get to a harsh reality in real estate where you're going to decline in your business for agents that are able to talk value to them, get them to a buyer broker, buyer consultation, and actually sign them to a buyer broker agreement. So there's going to be some weird interaction, and we can talk about that a little later between at open houses and things like that. That's a little bit gray still. But I want to note a couple things. One is, despite all these changes in 93.7 and all that stuff, and this is still holds true, about 80% of listings happen one of two ways. They find their listing agent they either know the agent already, or they're referred to the agent by a friend or family member. Now, I want to note that for those of you who want more listings, they're in your database. They're literally in your phone, because that's where 80%. And if you're hunting outside of that, if you're door knocking or doing other stuff to get listings outside, you will get them, but you're hunting in 20% of the market. Just letting you know that right now. So, and if you are worried about showing value on the buy side, just note the people that are already in your phone and your database who know you will trust you anyway. So they're going to have you're going to have to less show skill and there to do that. So the answer number one about NAR and all this is get very good at your database. Get them to love you, get in relationships, love them. So I just want to, as a practice, you guys need to understand that. And we were at club yesterday and we had a deep talk about loving your people, right? How to love your people, how to get engagement with your people, because that's going to be the most important thing for success going forward. Two, and let me back this out, say listings are going to become more vitally important. Now, as this buyer broker stuff goes sideways, we'll see, trust me, when July happens and MetroList bans their things, buyer broker compensation is going to move off MetroList. So that means there will be no buyer broker commission displayed. They may have keywords in the confidential agent marks that says seller concessions provided, but you're going to have to call to negotiate that, or call to get something like that. You're going to have to put it in your offer. We're going to talk about that, right? To get those, you're going to have to negotiate that outside of MetroList to make those deals happen and earn a commission. Likely you're going to see commission volatile, where you're going to have to negotiate part of the commission. You're going to have to get your buyer on board because that's going to be part of the offer, and they can counter both your commission and the
Yeah, right now.
Oh. And so just note that that's the world we're going to. We are here to prepare you for that. And at the same time, just note if I suspect there's going to be a lot of volatility on the buyer side of the commission. And you already see people now saying like, I already see people like, list your home. I already know agents that are, I'll list your home for no buyer agent commission. You don't have to pay a commission, right? So you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see a lot of that come up. And I just want you to know that there's going to be volatility on the buyer side on commission. So sometimes you're going to want a deal and they're only going to pay 1%. And you're going to have to like, you're going to have to like decide if you want to work for that, right? And so, or if you want to go to your buyer and get more, right? So those are going to be those discussions now. Two, if you want control of your business and income, do more listings. And I'm just going to say that right now. Listings are going to be key because you're going to control the commission at that point. You're going to even control what the buyers you did before, but it's going to be even more so. I think as this gets wide with the public is going to start trying to go to the seller directly. I mean, go to the listing agent directly and bypass a buyer broker in a lot of cases, just because they think that they won't have to pay a broker then if they do that, right? Now, I'm not saying as a listing agent, if you get a dual agency offer that you don't make them pay a commission, I wouldn't work for free anyways, but you'll need to negotiate that. But I feel like there's going to be perception that if they go directly to the listing agent, they're going to get a better deal or they're not going to have to pay as much. So if you want more stability, and some of you bigger agents on this call, if you want more stability, you need to be listing focused. If you want more listings, it's in your database, right? So with that all said, I don't want to hijack it, but I'm just saying these are the things I see coming down in the market going forward, and these are things you need to prepare for as an agent, right? And if you need more help, I need help on buyer presentations. Talk to myself, talk to Michelle, talk to Bruce. We have video recorded with Jake and Rich on how they do buyer consultations at a high level, right? You know, how they get people to do buyer consultations, right? So we have these tools for you to be successful in this market, but you're going to have to engage. You're going to have to get better at buyer consultations. You're going to have to get better at your database in this new market. And the market going forward is going to reward the agents that are more professional. It's going to reward the agents that love their people and do a good job with their people. And it's going to reward the agents that focus on listings, right? And so I just want that noted, and hopefully that hits true for you guys, and we're here to help you through that process. But in the meantime, I don't want to hijack this anymore. Bruce, go ahead. We're going to talk about how to actually physically use the new forms that are coming out in July. Oh, yes. One other thing, the new forms are coming out in July. Bruce, that's what we're talking about now. So these are going to hit the market in July. They're going to start requiring it. Likely when they adopt the rule, we're going to adopt a similar rule that you will do a buyer broker agreement with all your clients, with all your buyers at the same time. Please note, we just found out that the governor and the legislature and DRE already have draft language for a bill to require it in the state of California anyways. So it's going to be a requirement at the state of California. So there might be further changes when that law hits our books, and that's supposed to go live. They want to go live in 2025. So just note there's a lot of changes happening here now, and it's going pretty quick. So one for officing, if you have a question, Bruce is going to be going. Please put your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat. If you have questions, I will interrupt Bruce and ask those questions for you, just so we can keep this moving along pretty quickly. So Bruce, take it away. So
my turn now?
Yeah, your turn.
All right. Can you all see I just want to make sure everybody can see the screen that I have shared.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
Perfect. Before I actually get to that, couple things. You know, as John said, this little thing happened recently with this, you know, proposed NAR settlement. And it's going to have, you know, far-reaching effects in our industry. Many of them are actually positive. I think it'll up the professionalism quite a bit, especially on the buy side. But if you look at the details of the NAR settlement, it's actually not that it's not that complicated. You have you can't represent a buyer without a buyer representation agreement. You can't, if you're a listing side or a seller, you cannot reference a commission in the MLS. And third, the seller can reference through their agent in the MLS verbiage that says something to the effect of seller will pay concessions. You just can't use the word commissions. And so, the devil is in all the details, how that gets rolled out. Um, it's a pretty sure bet. Metrolist, when they adopt this, they're going to remove the commission field. So you won't even be able to put zero commission. It's just going to be gone. And as far as seller concessions being referenced, at a minimum, we should be able to use the confidential remarks section, but they may very well have a checkbox that says seller will pay concessions that the listing agent can check. All right. Um, Piggybacking real quick on what John said about what's going on in the state legislature. That whole idea of passing a statewide law to require um, broker compensation agreements in California. It's in the Judiciary Committee right now. They anticipate probably around the first of the year is when it will become law in the state. But one of the things, and all of this is being pushed by CAR as well, because they want everybody to be on an equal playing field, whether you're a realtor or not a realtor. Right now, the NAR settlement only affects realtors. So CAR is really, really working with the state to get this thing passed. The other thing that came out of the meeting that we had um, with CAR Legal on Friday. Actually, it was with the president of CAR on Friday, and they had the DRE commissioner on there speaking as well. But the other thing that came out of that is they're trying to limit buyer broker agreements to a 3-month duration. It has yet to be seen whether that'll actually happen or not, but that's one of the other aspects to that. Moving on to these forms, not only will I go over the forms related to the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement, there's also, this whole thing happened all at a very convenient time. CAR normally comes out with new forms in June. And they had already prepared a number of these forms that would have been included in the stuff that we're talking about for the buyer representation agreement. They had already included a number of these forms in the update. The whole format of the buyer representation agreement, as you'll see in a moment, has changed dramatically as compared to what's in the forms library right now. And I think you'll find it a positive change. But they're also modifying listing agreements to look like in the same appearance as you would see in the RPA, as well as what's going to be in the buyer representation agreement, where you have that nice grid on the first page where everything is spelled out nice and cleanly. And then there's a few new forms that have been added that I think are important that I cover with you. I go over these forms in a little bit more detail in a video that I did last week that you should be able to watch on the office's YouTube channel.
I also just posted that as well.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
My concern is in this class right here, there's far too much information to go through it in the time that we really need to. So it'll be a much more redacted version of going through these forms. But if you look, my first thought was, and if you look at this first page, if you've never used a buyer broker agreement before, and all of a sudden you're hit with this thing where now it's mandatory. If you don't have a buyer broker agreement, you're not going to get paid. There'd be nice if there was some guidance as to what kind of paperwork you really need to be considering and how that buyer process might play out. And so I've put some idea here as to, once you do your buyer contact, your initial intake, then you're going to want to fill out some forms. The forms you're going to want to fill out are the BRBC generally, the BTA, which is the buyer transaction advisory, the buyer compensation advisory, or I'm sorry, broker compensation advisory, and that's going to be used on listings as well as for buy sides. The BIPP, which is buyer identification of preferences and properties, and the BFPI, which is the buyer financial and personal info. These two forms here, I think, will be immensely helpful for you as a buyer's agent, because between these two forms, you're going to identify exactly what your client is looking for, as well as you'll be able to document that they are in fact qualified to buy, and you're not going to be wasting your time with them. And then the last form on this side is the ABCD, which is anticipated broker compensation disclosure. There's some optional forms. This first one, the DMBR, which is disclosure and modification to a buyer representation agreement. This form, this is what you're going to use if you've entered into a BRBC prior to the new form release in June. This one just replaces and clarifies some of the language and makes it in line with the NAR settlement. The MTBR, modification of terms, buyer representation agreement, this form will be used to modify a current BRBC. Now, I'm sorry, somebody speaking?
How's work for you? How's Chris? Or how's working with
Can you, thank you. All right. And then I want to speak, there's a MTBR and there is an MTLA. One of them, or both of those together, will be replacing the forms that you currently use. It's called a modification of terms. They're going to break it out. One's for buyers, one will be for sellers. So once this forms release happens, and we'll be modifying the templates in Command as well once these changes take place. For buyers, for modifying terms, it's going to be this MTBR instead of the MT. And then there's a generic compensation agreement, and that's only to be used when there is no other signed listing, buyer representation, or single party agreement. And the form is designed to be used for either side. So that'll be helpful there. Once you get your initial forms filled out, then you want to do some listing and property research once you identify some properties that your buyer might want to see. What does that mean? It means reaching out to the listing agent and getting a feel from the listing agent. Is the seller willing to pay some compensation? Is the listing agent willing to share some compensation? And this is assuming that there's nothing, in the MLS that references buyer concessions or seller will pay buyer concessions or something like that to clue you in. Even if there are I personally would still recommend reaching out to the listing agent. So with that in mind, if you are primarily focused on listings, you want to be aware you're probably going to be getting more phone calls from buyer's agents. They're going to want to know, are you willing to pay some of your commission to the buyer, to apply towards the buyer's buyer broker compensation, or is the seller willing to? And I would say to you, even if the listing agent says no, the seller's not going to pay anything, I would still recommend that when you complete your purchase contract, you submit a form that we'll go over shortly called an SPBB, which is seller payment to buyer's broker. Make that form a part of your purchase contract and submit them together, because you never know. Once the listing agent presents those offers to the seller may be willing to pay buyer's compensation. So moving down, after you've done your research, you're going to fill out your forms. It's going to be an RPA. You would use a CBC in the event the listing agent says, yeah, I'm going to pay some of the commission. CBC has been redesigned to account for this. I mentioned the SPBB, that's the seller payment to buyer's broker. And that can be, when you use that form, it is actually made a part of the contract. And then there's a final form that may come in handy. It's a COBR, which is cancellation of buyer representation. I put a note here. Please keep in mind, if you do not have a buyer representation agreement, that means you don't get paid when this thing closes. That will
Bruce, I have
be,
a question on that. I have like a
Yeah.
couple questions that are coming directly to me. Do you want me to interrupt you like this? Because it's pertaining where you're at in the presentation, or do you want me to wait?
let's hold off until I get through the actual forms, because I might answer their questions then. Does that work?
Not a problem.
Okay. All right. So first form is the newly designed and improved buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. This is the last version that I've had access to. And you can see here, they've taken on that grid format like you see in the RPA, which I think is really easy to read. You've got your representation period. It starts and it ends on a certain date, whatever you put in there. Keep in mind, as I said earlier, the state, when they pass their regulation, as of right now, they're pushing for a 3-month max. So that may be the rule once that's implemented. Type of representation, it defaults to a non-exclusive representation. You can make it exclusive. And, I don't know John's feeling on this, but I would advocate making it exclusive.
I would always advocate doing exclusive.
Okay. If exclusive is checked, the broker is entitled to be paid if the buyer acquires any property during the representation period, with or without your involvement. So that was kind of my motivation. It's kind of like the exclusive listing. If they sell the house to anybody, whether you introduce them to it or not, you're entitled to your commission.
Hey, Bruce,
Um,
I wanted to talk a little bit. Can I interject about when the
Yeah.
buyer broker agreement needs to be used? So just so you guys know, when you do a real estate licensed activity on behalf of a buyer, you must have this form signed prior to that time. What does that mean? If you use your lockbox to show a home, you are now you're acting as their agent. You will need a buyer broker agreement. So if you're at an open house and you say, hey, there's another house down the road, I want to see it. You say, yeah, let's go. Buyer broker agreement.
Well, we'll get to open houses in a minute too, but that's still an open issue. But CAR has devised not one, not two, but 3 different forms to deal with potential issues with open houses. And we'll go through those too.
Yeah, I'm not saying not showing that home. I'm saying showing another home.
Yeah, and that will also be covered in those open house forms.
Yeah, so just so you
Afton
know,
has a
at
question.
the time of interaction, the minute you start doing real estate activities, acting as their agent, not just selling the home, but now I'm acting as their agent, trying to procure them as a buyer. At that point, a buyer broker discussion needs to happen at that point.
Yeah, and I would think of that as an opportunity too, because
There's
that
also a
gives
question.
you the opportunity to show the value, explain to them the value you're going to offer, and get them to ink that document with you. You're starting that process of building that rapport with them. So, all right, you done, John?
Actually, there's somebody who has their hand raised. Do you want to go ahead and go, Afton? Or Bobby? I can't tell which one it is because I can't see you.
I just to clarify, so that is legal requirement from CAR. We can't even show a property. Somebody calls our sign and says, I want to see this house. We have to make them sign an agreement before we can legally open the door.
That is correct.
Okay, that's all I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Assuming you want to represent them as a potential buyer. So.
Well, obviously, yeah.
So
show
yeah,
up.
I'm saying if you're just saying, oh, I'll just show you the home because I'm the listing agent, I want to show it to you, that's one thing. But if you're saying I want to procure them as a buyer, then it's buyer broker agreement.
I have a quick question as well. Where do we turn these forms in? If we have like 30 people show up to an open house and we have, say, 2 people that want to go see open houses, with a listing agreement, you automatically turn that into your broker. Do we have to do the same thing with a buyer broker agreement?
Yes, and you can upload. You will be able to upload multiple documents in the same line item within Command. But more specifically to your question on open houses, there's actually a form that you can choose to use. It's one of their proposed open house forms, and it's more like a sign-in sheet. So you could have multiple signatories on that form and upload that. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, and just so you know, we will change command. If you go into a profile in the checklist, there's a consultation section. In that command, we are going to, it's already there, buyer broker agreement, but we're going to start mandating requirements in that consultation section is where you're going to upload your buyer broker agreements.
Yeah, and as these forms are actually released in June, the ones that aren't part of command already, I'll have to go in and add them in manually, which I'll do. All right. Going back to the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement, I've highlighted a few fields here. You'll be able to download these and look at them at your convenience. But you'll see here, section D is where you define how you're going to be paid. The amount of compensation, you can do it as a percentage, flat fee. There's a section here that talks about payment from third parties. And this is really critical for you guys to know and understand. If let's just say, and I'm going to use, and I'm not advocating that you use this particular amount on any buyer or broker agreement, but let's just say, for example, that you come to an agreement with a buyer and they agree to pay you 2% of the acquisition price. And then you reach out to the listing agent, and the listing agent says, oh, the seller is willing to pay up to 2.5%. And right away you're thinking to yourself, oh, well, gee, that means I can get 2.5%, or I can hand a half of 1% of what I get over to my buyer to use towards their closing cost. That is not the case. You are allowed to be paid no more than what the buyer has agreed to pay you in this buyer compensation agreement. So if you put 2% here, even if the seller is willing to pay more, you are not able to get more, and you cannot even credit that excess over to your buyer. Now, there is a solution to this if you are of a mind, or you had planned on trying to credit that over to your buyer. And the solution is, when you write your offer, write up the offer for this, with the SLPP form for the seller to pay you the amount that the buyer agreed to pay you. And then you can also, nothing prevents you from writing in a term that the seller is going to credit the buyer 1/2 of 1% for recurring and non-recurring closing costs. So you can get around it like that if your goal is to get it over to the buyer as a credit. All right. Cancellation notice. There are different terms for canceling depending on whether it's exclusive or non-exclusive. Exclusive cancellation kicks in 30 days after receipt. That's the big difference. This form, the BRBC, is going to include with it a form called a broker compensation advisory. And we'll see that in a minute. Let's see here. The last page of the BRBC, item 15. You may ask, why is it asking me to repeat what the buyer is agreeing to pay me right here? And the reason is because this becomes knowledge that must be disclosed to all parties. And you can use this last page and turn that over to the title company. You're free to do that. You're free to turn it over to the seller side. And by having it on this last page, you don't have to give them the entire agreement. Right. Next form is the buyer transactional advisory. This form here, it is unclear as of right now if this will still be in the CAR forms after June. There is some talk that they may be removing this one from the library. I actually like the form. It's a simple disclosure or advisory, I guess it is, but it talks about the agent's duties and limitations, the scope of the agent's duties, talks about dual agency and things like that. But there has been talk they might be removing it. So we'll know in June, when we get there. The BCA, the Broker Compensation Advisory, this form explains how you can get paid. Section 1 discusses the seller side. So this form was used for both listing and for buyer brokers. The section 1 covers listings. Section 2 and 3 discuss the requirement of buyer broker agreements, as well as how the buyer brokers can get paid. And they break it down into plain English right here under section 3. And I don't need to read that to you. You can read it yourselves. The form BIPP, buyer identification of preferences and priorities. This one and the one that follows, I think will really be helpful for you, especially when you're doing your buyer consults. It shows the buyer has the ability to list exactly what they're looking for here, right down to locations, counties, etc., any other features that they want. This form and the one that I'm going to go through next both come with confidentiality clauses, meaning unless the buyer gives you permission, you cannot disclose any of this information to the seller or the listing agent. All right.
Can I ask a quick question on
Yeah.
that? So when you're going through the preferences and say they started looking for a duplex and they switched to a single family, but you don't have it checked, do you have to do an addendum
No.
and then turn that in?
No. This is to help you. It's to help them. Anybody that's worked with buyers knows they has had the experience of having them change up on you midway through their searches. So it's going to be a common thing. This is not something that you need to do an addendum on. You could, I mean, it comes numbered. You can do number 1, you can do number 2, number 3, as many as you want. But I don't think as an office we're going to require that you keep updating the form.
Got it.
All right. The next form, buyer financial and personal information. I don't know about you, but I actually had the experience of a buyer giving me a counterfeit pre-approval letter. So they do strange things to get to work with agents to look at houses they can't buy. But this form, this has everything about their finances, how much of a deposit they have, how much of a down payment they have, who they're pre-approved with, if they are pre-approved, sources of the down payment. There's a disclosure in here for if they are licensed real estate agents, so you know to put that disclosure in your purchase contract. All sorts of helpful stuff here. Again, this form also comes with a confidentiality clause. Same rules apply unless the buyer gives express permission to share this information with the seller or the listing agent. It cannot be shared. Anticipated broker compensation disclosure. Top section, as I note here, is the only part that needs to actually be filled out by the buyers. But this form is nice because it documents what you have shown them. So you take this out with you, you can put a property address, the agent initials, the buyer initials after they looked at it. If you make an offer, you fill that information in here. You can document the compensation and where you got the source of that compensation. So it's a pretty handy form, I think. And then the disclosure and modification to buyer representation agreement. This form, as I told you earlier, if you've entered into a BRBC prior to the new forms release in June, it informs the buyer that the broker can no longer accept compensation that exceeds the amount specified in the BRBC. It also explains what will happen if the BRBC contains a term that allows excess compensation be turned over to the buyer, because that can't be done any longer unless, as I said, you get around that by writing into the contract a credit from the seller to the buyer.
And I want to point that out and highlight that for you, Bruce. Just know the buyer broker agreement starting July going forward is going to state that if you put 2.5 and the listings agent offers you 3, you can only take 2.5 if you have 2.5 in your buyer broker agreement. So, and if you wanted 3, you'd have to go back to the seller, get a modification that moved it to 3, and inform them that I'm actually going to get 3 because they're offering 3, and you'd have to get agreement from your buyer to do that. So when you're writing in your compensation on your buyer broker agreement, just be careful because you're going to be held to that standard, even if you can make more. So
yeah. All right, going back. And it's modification of buyer representation agreement. That's covered in this section right here. The MTBR, modification of terms buyer representation agreement. This is for this is to document a change in the buyer representation agreement. And this is they really simplified this thing. So this is the replacement for the form MT. MT, as I said, will no longer be available. This on the buy side, this will be the one you use. You can change the expiration date. You can change the manner or type of compensation. And there's a section for other terms you might want to put in. Very, very simplified and dumbed down, but it serves its purpose well, I think. And then they have a generic compensation agreement. This is regardless of which side of the transaction you're on. For use if there's no listing agreement, buyer representation agreement, or single party compensation agreement. And so if it's on the listing side, they have this little section here that that's the only reason this is here is talk about the benefits of using the MLS, just like a normal listing agreement. But the compensation stuff is entered in up here. And I'm sorry. One other thing I want to mention before I get to the RPA. One of the big things that the BRBC is doing with this version is the way they've written it. The CAR attorneys have basically established that buyer brokers now have what's known as a third-party beneficiary standing. So basically, if you sign a buyer broker agreement and the buyer, at the last minute says, I'm not going to pay you. If you ended up going through mediation, arbitration, or going to court, whatever, you actually have standing to sue to enforce that right. So that's a nice plus if you were to choose to do that. Now, the RPA made a couple changes that I wanted to point out. You're already familiar with the grid format. Section G3, the verbiage here, seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer broker under a separate agreement, CAR form SPBB. You check this box, it's going to add in the SPBB form where you will define what you're requesting the seller pay in place of the buyer having to compensate the buyer's broker. So that's that. And then they're adding in, I thought this would be a good time to mention this, the new version is adding in a new contingency. Everybody has probably heard or read in the papers or online or heard in the news about all the problems with the insurance industry in California. People not being able to renew their homeowners insurance, people not being able to get homeowners insurance, and even the people that can get it, sometimes the cost is so cost prohibitive, it's ridiculous, and some people are having to go to the state to get insurance from the state. So what this new contingency does is it works like every other contingency, but the terms here are the buyer must be able to secure insurance for their purchase at an acceptable price to them within the contingency period. So if you're representing a buyer and you happen to be near the foothills and your buyer gets a quote, $15,000 a year to ensure that get homeowners insurance, this gives them an out for backing out of the contract. The only thing I would tell you here is a lot of times buyers will wait until the last minute before they start looking for insurance. Because this is now identified as a contingency, you want to make sure your buyers hop on that train right away. And just as a side note, I want to pitch Alex with our office. She is amazing as an insurance broker, and she saved my butt when we were having problems with Allstate. So just something to consider. The other thing I want to bring to your attention on the RPA there is a new form and a new law that kicks in January. I want to make you aware of. Balconies, exterior stairways, and other elevated event elements. What this new law says is that beginning January 1st, properties with any building containing 3 or more dwelling units with elevated balconies, stairways, or other elements must have them inspected. Now, there's a separate form to this, and who is able to do these inspections is going to be an issue, and we'll go over that in a few minutes. But my feeling on this, and John, you may feel otherwise, but my feeling is this is mainly going to be in condos. I think condos are probably going to be the big ones. And I would guess once this law kicks in, that the HOA management companies are going to be taking a proactive step with this and having their balconies certified on a regular basis. Don't know that for sure, but that would be my guess as to how they're going to operate. And then the last thing I want to point out, that's not it. If the agent has agreed to compensate the buyer side commission, then there is a section they've added in here for the CBC. You want to make sure, and again, this is one, I don't know how you feel about it, John, but I would advocate, if that's the case, complete the CBC and get it over the listing agent before you send the offer over. That's my feeling on it. But the new CBC form talks all about buyer compensation. And they've added this in on the last page, or on the signature page on the RPA. And then we have the CBC. So they've taken all references to MLS offers of compensation and membership with MLS out. That's no longer a part of it. That's just in order to comply. They've added in offer regarding compensation. Seller's broker agrees to pay buyer's broker compensation in the amount of X or a flat fee. They've added in a mediation and arbitration clause. And other than that, it's pretty self-explanatory. But again, my feeling is send that over to the listing agent before you send the offer. And then this form, this becomes a part of the contract if you check that box on your RPA. And I put a little summary here about what the form does. You can look at this at your own convenience, but basically it's outlining the seller's payment of the buyer broker's commission fees or compensation fees. And again, this also defines that the buyer's broker is a third-party beneficiary, which makes this document legally enforceable in court if you had to go there. And the cancellation of buyer representation form. They have an most recent option, or most recent upgrade, is they put an option for both parties to cancel mutually. And there's different defined cancellations in it, depending on if it's exclusive or non-exclusive.
Is it possible for the agent to cancel the buyer broker agreement without the buyer's consent, or does it have to be mutual?
It is possible for the agent to cancel, but let's see here. Yeah, broker gives notice to the other to cancel the buyer representation and terminate the agency.
So it's no different than a listing.
Yeah.
agreement.
Well, no, listing agreement requires signature of the brokerage and the seller.
Oh, so it's just the buyer, not the broker, that needs a signature.
Well, when it says broker here, it's using that in terminology that means the brokerage or the agent. So
Okay,
you can see down here, buyer or the buyer broker.
okay, so that's different because in the listing you need the
It
broker.
has to actually be the broker.
Do you think that'll get changed with the new California law?
Who knows?
Okay,
Your guess is.
continue on.
All right. All right, so that's that for that package.
So
And
we
then-
finished the buy side. Are there any questions on the buy side?
Yeah.
Anybody
Sorry
have
about that.
out there? So we just went over what it's going to take to write the offer, to get the buyer broker agreement signed, all those docs, as well as finding out compensation and writing offers of compensation in your RPA. So anyone have questions?
I got-
John, it's Francine, I do.
Right.
So Bruce and John, are we moving, of course, moving forward starting from today, we're doing buyer broker agreements, I get that part. What of all of these forms do I still need now to fill out? All of them when I do a buyer broker agreement?
Bruce,
Yeah.
can you go back to the list for me?
Yeah, I'm getting it back on. I clicked the wrong button. Bear with me here.
Okay,
Bruce is not as familiar with Zoom as.
Bruce is not a techie.
it's okay. Do you want me to read them? I can read them off. I wrote them
No,
down.
that's fine. There we go. All right. Can you see that now?
Not the new one. We have the,
Okay. Hang on.
go back to the,
We share. All right. Can you see it
There
now?
it is. Yes,
All right.
thank you.
Now, so what I did here is based on the forms they have now that
Yeah.
they're, anticipating releasing. These are the forms that I would anticipate you're going to want to include. Now, when you as part of your initial consultation, when you fill out your forms, I only listed RPA, CBC, SPBB, those types of forms. You know that the RPA is going to come with a bunch of other forms, but these are the main ones that I wanted to focus on that had to be discussed for buyer representative compensation.
and Bruce, on the buyer broker agreement side, I know that the buyer representation agreement is going to be required. That form will also trigger other ones, like it'll trigger the buyer transactional advisory.
Yes.
And it'll trigger the broker compensation advisory, right? So,
Yeah,
Oh, I
well,
see.
it will trigger the BTA if the BTA stays part of the package.
correct,
The-
yeah.
the
So if it does, if it
BCA
doesn't, it'll go away, then it won't, but
Yeah,
the BRBC will trigger other forms automatically, right?
yes,
But the BIPP and the BFPI, those are recommended, but if you want to do your own, if you are okay with your own buyer broker, how you do your stuff, but that's just a way to facilitate your conversation. CAR's trying to help you facilitate a buyer broker conversation, right? So,
Okay,
right.
You
I
said
get
that
it.
4 and 5 are gonna be recommended but not required, the BIP and the BFPI? Because if we're doing our own consultation sheet, do we need the BIP and the BFPI for the?
No,
no, no, those will be optional. Those will be
So
optional.
those 2 are optional, but the
Those 2 will
first
be
3 are
optional.
required for the office?
Yes,
Yes.
correct.
thank you, Parm. Thanks.
Thanks.
Is that
All
clear?
right.
Everyone clear on that? So.
All right, can I move on to the
There's
next?
some more questions. I've
Okay.
been typing
Okay,
them in. Thank
How
you.
will you be approaching this with sellers? Will you recommend your sellers pay a buyer commission? Curious the language you will use.
I would.
I would. So what we are saying now is, and we have some sellers that don't, on my team, we have sellers that don't want to pay a buyer broker commission. What we're saying is we recommend it, one, because if I look at the comps you're looking at on your comps, they're paying a buyer commission, they're paying a buyer agent commission, they're paying a buyer agent commission. Do you think that you're gonna be at a disadvantage versus those people that are offering buyer agent commissions, that the agents now, those buyers don't have to, on those houses, don't have to worry about paying their buyer's agent, where on yours, they're gonna have to factor that in their financing to pay you if you can't negotiate out, right? And what's the likelihood on yours that you're also going to get requests because you don't offer buyer commission, that the buyer's just going to ask you for that compensation anyways, right? Through the offer. And so it's advisable if you want to compete and get the best price for your home that you offer a buyer agent compensation in your listing. Some we don't, but we just warn them that, like, you know, it could still be negotiated and they can still ask for it, right?
And
But
it's likely they will ask for it.
yeah, it's likely they will ask for it because they're not going to have the ability to buy. Most of the buyers on your house at your price point, for the most part, are not going to have the ability to pay their closing costs, down payment, and the commission. So they're going to ask for compensation. So you may get your price, but they're going to ask for dramatic concessions to make their offer work. And so we have that conversation with the agents, and most of our listings still come with buyer compensation even after we have that conversation, right? So,
Yeah.
Afton?
Yeah, so I wanted to just touch on this. This is for kind of everyone that's worried about where the market's going and with not paying a buyer agent commission. I've already had an agent or a seller that said, I'm not paying a buyer agent commission. I'd wait till July, so I might as well do it now. Here's exactly what happened. The conversation was, your competition's still paying commission right now. Yeah, well, I still don't want to, I don't want to offer it. I'm like, okay, well, this could impact your property from selling. You understand that, right? Yeah, but you know, I want to give it a try, see if I can sell it without. So it happened. We're in the market for 3 weeks. I got a ton of agent calls in the very beginning with interested clients, but they called me up and say, I don't work for free. How does this work? As much as I encourage them to show the property, and if you have interest, write your compensation in the contract, they didn't even show the property. They didn't even show the property. And then several weeks later, when I had no showings, he's like, okay, well, I guess we can offer a buyer's agent commission now since nobody's really interested without one. So we have it in there now. And now I'm trying to go back to every agent that I had a conversation with in the very beginning and let them know that we are now offering a commission. But what has happened is that now the listing's been on the market for over 30 days. It's a great property, but now it's sitting, and now I'm going to ask for a price reduction today. So food for thought, and you know, literally, you know, a lot of sellers have to figure it out on their own, but just something that I've already experienced so far.
Well,
You know-
here's something to add to that. I have a buyer was on the opposite side. I was the buyer calling up an agent that said that the sellers weren't going to do a commission. My buyers didn't want to go to the property because they wanted me to be represented and to get paid. So it was a two-for. It wasn't that even they weren't refusing to show the property. I was still telling them about the property, but they wanted to be represented by somebody and they didn't want to pay the commission. So
And that's what
that
you need to
was,
tell your sellers, like, yeah, like you are going to be at a significant disadvantage. And I ask them to put on your buyer hat, like put on your buyer hat and say, look, if we were looking in the neighborhood and you're going to sell and you're going to buy somewhere else and you're looking in your neighborhood and there's 7 houses you want to look at and 2 of them are not paying a buyer's agent commission, where you're going to have to come in with thousands of dollars more, like, maybe, to get that done, or even negotiate that into your contract, that, like, are you going to even look at those properties? And they're going to say no, right? And then you're asking me to do the same thing, when the number one way we're going to get you the offer and the highest price is getting people to look at your property. The more people get to look at your property, the more likely we're going to get multiple offers, the more likely we're going to get the price you want. By doing this, you're going to severely limit the amount of people that will see your home. And thus, by default, you're going to get a lower offer on average. And I suspect over time that we're going to see stats that bore that out, and it's going to become kind of like, we're going to get a stabilization where there's going to be a broker compensation offered that is going to be still standard. It's just going to be it's going to have to flesh itself out a little bit.
so
Suzanne,
I have another question
Go ahead.
regards to open houses.
Go ahead.
Mark, why don't you hang on the open houses till we get to that section?
Yeah, we're gonna
Oh,
talk
I'm
about
sorry.
open houses in detail. Okay.
No, I'm
Suzanne,
sorry.
question on buyers?
I just have 2 points to make. One, I think as an office, it's just a good idea for us to do a little bit of training on maybe buyers that are looking to become buyers agents that are looking to become listing agents, because I would hate for someone to take this as an opportunity of, let me get a quick listing now at a 2.5%, 3.5% commission and not worry about the buyer's agent commission, because they're going to come across exactly the scenario that Afton just mentioned about property sitting on the market, having to offer commission later on, right? Because they might think it's a good way to get into the listing game, and that sets the wrong tone. And then secondly, before or up until July, our fiduciary duty is to show every property that's available, because the buyer's agent, as the buyer's agent, we're getting compensated from the listing side. When we're talking to sellers, now we can let them know that in some cases, if we're not offering compensation, it technically isn't the buyer's agent's fiduciary duty to show our property, because they might be hurting their buyer if their buyer has to bring to the table more funds to close in order to pay for their compensation. So they really are underexposing their property, kind of like what Afton mentioned in her listing, because of the fact that there's going to be buyers that don't want to see it, like Mark mentioned, because they want their agents to get paid. And there's going to be agents that realistically in the future that may not have to show it because it's actually impacting their buyer's net proceeds. So
Yeah, all you have to tell the buyer is say, on these properties, you're gonna have to bring an extra 2.5%. And you've done your fiduciary. They said, I don't want that. You've done your fiduciary, right? So at that point, and I want people to understand that that's the thing, you need to work with your buyers, because the buyers don't want to pay your commission anyway. So just note that they're going to be on your side. So as sellers, I'm going to say, like, look, these buyers agents, they're not going to want to add 2.5 to the consumer, and they don't even want to try to have to negotiate that a lot of times, right? So just, if you offer a compensation, if you want to just say, I'll take it as it comes, you're going to get a lot less people interested in negotiating that, right? So thank you, Parm. And we will have a training here soon on the listing side, and we'll also talk about objection handling on this, on where sellers don't want to pay part of the commission, right?
We also
one
have the
more-
one with Jake tomorrow as well
Yeah.
on buyers.
We got one more hand raised with Susanna, and then
Yeah.
we'll move on.
Okay, I have a question. So for the buyer agreement, if your buyer off the bat tells you, I don't have the funds to pay your commission, is that an option? Like for them to say, I can't pay you, like I wanna look at homes that only offer to pay your commission?
Yeah, that, hold on one moment.
Could I say something on that point?
Yeah, just so you
Yeah.
know, that's why I'll say a little bit. Yes, it's just like a buyer having down payment assistance. Like, if you're doing a 2-1 buy down on their purchase, you have to have a credit. So you're only look at homes where they're going to be able to do a credit for you, right? So same thing, if your buyer can't physically fund, they can purchase, but they can't afford your commission, then yeah, you're going to have to only show homes where there's compensation offered or being able to negotiate that in.
But you still have to list compensation in the buyer broker agreement.
Correct.
Otherwise, even if the seller is willing to pay, or the listing agent's willing to pay, you won't be able to collect.
You must have a
Okay.
buyer broker agreement signed with compensation on it to collect a buyer side commission.
Yeah,
Okay, so it still has to be written down. You just would basically show the ones that are only
Yeah,
willing
you
to
would just work
offer
with them and
that
say, I'm only going to
compensation.
show you homes where I know where I can get this compensation
Okay,
paid from the seller or the
perfect.
listing agent. Yeah.
yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Can we move on to the
Yeah, let's
next
move on to the
section?
seller side. So,
All right.
'cause I know there's a
So-
lot of questions about open houses. So
Yeah, well, let me get, the listing side should not take more than a couple minutes.
yeah.
So let me shrink that and put this one up. Can you all see the miscellaneous listing form changes and additions? Can you?
Why is it on
Somebody?
this training?
I cannot.
no, it's the buyer representation
All right,
process
hang
flow.
on. You share. There we go. All right, now you should be able to see it.
Yeah, what?
All right.
The training right now.
So, there were some changes made to the listing agreement.
What?
There were some
Mary,
changes made to the
you-
listing
You
agreement.
need to be on this.
Um,
I'm gonna put this on the speaker so you can listen to it, but you should be
Can
on this
somebody
one.
please mute Andy? There we go. All right.
So sorry.
Here's some listing changes. They redid the residential listing agreement to put it into that nice grid format. As you can see here, things are much easier to understand, much clearer. they've given you this nice little section, section C, where you will break down what you and your seller agree to in terms of compensation. Just because your seller says they're not willing to pay anything, if they say that, this will be written up accordingly. It does not prevent a buyer's agent from including an SLPP with their offer and asking the seller to pay. This is just what the seller and you work out when you're listing the property. So it can be compensation to the seller's broker, only the seller side of the transaction. It has an option for additional compensation, if any, to the seller's broker to be offered to the buyer's broker, and so on and so forth going down. Remember, I said a few minutes ago, these things are changing like by the minute, by the day. These nice little blue things here, they were added in for clarification just yesterday. So they're still working. They're working diligently to make these things as user-friendly as possible and as clear to understand as possible. Optional seller concessions that the seller or you can reference on behalf of the seller in the MLS. If they check this, they're authorizing you to say that the seller is willing to offer seller concessions, up to a certain percentage or up to a certain amount. And I'm anticipating that's probably going to be either in a field that MetroList is going to add, or it'll be in confidential remarks once it's all finalized. That's the big thing I wanted to cover on. Under seller concessions, it describes here what that is, and it says that it may include, pardon me, among other things, title, escrow, lender fees, repairs, inspections, and broker compensation. Concessions identified in the MLS listing must not specify the concessions are to be used to pay for broker compensation. So again, you can't reference broker compensation, you can't reference commission, anything like that. It can just say seller concessions.
And I want it noted also, that seller concessions box. If you're negotiating, a seller says, I don't want to pay commission, but let them negotiate it, I'll throw it in. You need to check that box and say, like, can I actually say you're willing to offer seller concessions?
Yes.
As part of our marketing for your listing. You need to check that box. That will hopefully, I think, over time, alert buyer's agents that they're willing to pay. You just have to negotiate it, right? So, but if you know your seller's going to offer concessions, then you need to check that box and put that in there. Otherwise, remember, there's a rule that you can only advocate the list price of a property. So if you want to advocate something less than list price, like with the seller concession, you need to check that box and get permission. So,
yep. There's some verbiage in here that they've added. Seller acknowledges that real estate brokers must have a representation agreement with a buyer before showing the properties to that buyer. Seller consents to broker entering into a buyer representation and broker compensation agreement with the buyer, and that by doing so, it'll become dual agency. Then the broker compensation advisory, we've already gone over this on the buyer form side, so I don't need to go through that again. Modification of terms listing agreement. This is actually going to, again, this is on the listing side. This will replace the current form modification of terms. And you can see here it has spots to modify the price, the expiration date, compensation, basically anything you need to do normally that you have been using the form MT for on the listing side. This has you covered. And the DMLA, disclosure and modification to listing agreement. This is only to be used to modify listing agreements that you entered into before the new forms release in June. It informs the seller that offering compensation is now prohibited in the MLS. Brokers' efforts to offer compensation outside the MLS will satisfy the broker's duty to the seller. This form should be used prior to the expected July 2024 implementation date. There's no need to change or remove commissions from the MLS if they're already in there now, because if you use this form, it covers that once the MLS does remove that commission field. So if you have listings that are going to be running through, when this NAR settlement kicks in July, when we start kicking in implementation of it, then this would be a form that you would want to go through with your seller, have them sign. And that is it for those. Any questions on this little group of documents? Nope. Okay. All right, the next one and the last one is
Open houses.
open houses. Well, there's actually in other forms. Open houses, they kind of went crazy with these forms. And even like last week, there was one day where one form existed. The next day, they removed that form and replaced it with a completely different form. So they're working overtime on this stuff. But we've got a few: limited property, non-exclusive visitor representation and broker compensation agreement. That's a mouthful. LPRBC. We've got the VRBC, which is open house property tour visitor representation and compensation agreement. We've got the OHNA, and then the most recent one they just came out with was this OHNA-SI. And then I'll also go over the buyer's homeowner's insurance advisory and the wooden balconies and stair addendum. So on these open house forms, every bit of word that I'm getting out of CAR is these forms, they are preparing them in response to what may happen as a result of the NAR settlement, final approval, and whatever the attorneys determine we're going to have to implement. But nobody has come out with anything definitive as to what, if anything, will be required for open houses. The prevailing thought is if we let somebody into an open house, we have to have something. And so these forms, some of them do slightly different things, and we'll kind of talk about that. This particular form says right at the top, for use by an agent holding an open house or another agent giving a prospective purchaser a tour of an open house or other property. Kind of easy to understand. And this form here, if you're the agent touring people around to different houses, it has a spot where you can list up to 3 properties. And there's different things you can check. So for example, 1B, this would be checked for visitors touring one or more properties with an agent. And then the agent would list the properties here. There's a spot for the agent to list what their compensation is going to be. And it talks about how payments from third parties will be handled. Pretty simple form. The only thing that's not simple is not knowing for sure if it's going to have to be implemented or not. But as of right now, assume that this or one of the other forms will have to be implemented. The next form is the open house property tour visitor representation broker compensation agreement. This form is for a single property and it is non-exclusive agency only, right? If you use this form, single property, there's no exclusive representation. But you can allow people to come into the property. They agree that if they decide to buy it, they're going to pay X amount. Talks about, again, how money from third parties is handled. And then we have the OHNA, open house visitor non-agency disclosure. So this particular one limited only to the subject open house and does not establish an agency relationship with the open house visitor. So this would be, you're letting them into your open house. They are not agreeing to pay you anything. However, it does leave the window open here. If the visitor wants to work with the agent holding the open house, it tells them that they're going to have to do a BRBC or something else. And then if they're already represented, this box here can be checked, and they can go out and see it. Oops, that's not right. Lastly, we have this form, which is the open house visitor non-agency disclosure and sign-in. Again, this one, just like the previous form, creates no agency relationship, creates no obligation on the buyer to pay you or anything else, but it does talk about or does allow for them to do this like a sign-in sheet. You can just leave it out. They can sign in with their information. Advantage is you capture their information. They become part of your database if they decide not to buy. But again, there's nothing in here where they're agreeing to pay any type of commission. It says the agent does not represent the buyer or the visitor, as they call them here. And any communication with the agent is for the benefit of the seller.
And Bruce, I want to note something like this will often be, I think a lot of will anticipate using this at open houses to sign people in. Now, this is on behalf of the seller if someone wants to write an offer. The minute you change, I want you to know, the minute you start talking buyer mode, I can show you other homes. You start kicking in to try and convert them as a buyer, not to make an offer on the property, but to move them to somewhere else on a different property. Just note you're getting out of the purview of non-agency.
Of this agreement.
You're going into an agency on the buy side, and so you need to start talking about having a meeting, having consultation to meet to talk about that, because remember, you're within the non-agency preview if you're just selling the house and providing information to sell the house that you're in. But the minute you go outside of that, it changes, right? So I just want that.
Buyer's homeowners insurance advisory. This form is going to be required because of all the problems we're having with insurance and the fact that a new contingency has been added. It just goes over all that stuff for your buyer to understand. This has nothing to do with a buyer broker agreement, but it is a new form. I wanted to talk about it. And then the wooden balconies and stair addendum. This is the last one that I wanted to discuss. So again, this law kicks in January 1st, 2025. My feeling again is it's going to involve things like condos where you have, there's more than 3 units, you have multiple stories above the ground level, things like that. The thing that I wanted to point to your attention here is, oftentimes state government passes laws and they don't really think about the impact it has downstream. And I think this may have been one of those cases, because I looked up the actual health and safety code on this, and it's, according to the health and safety code, this inspection shall be performed by a licensed architect, licensed civil or structural engineer, a building contractor holding any or all of the A, B, or C-5 license classifications issued by the Contractor State Licensing Board, and have a minimum of 5 years experience in constructing multi-story wood frame buildings, or an individual certified as a building inspector or building official from a recognized state, national, or international association. The people that are going to be doing this inspection and certification, these are not your average run-of-the-mill home inspectors. And so if, once this law is implemented, if you're listing a property that's, a condo in a big multi-story building, early on, I think you want to be reaching out to the HOA management company and seeing if they have any inspections on file that are meant to comply with this law. And if not, then then we're going to have to start looking at other sources, because I don't think that there's going to be an industry, a cottage industry that's going to have sprung up by then to handle these types of inspections. And it's going to be a little bit more work that we'll have to do. You have any comment on this, John?
No, I think it's gonna have to flesh itself out.
We have some more questions. Stephen, do you want to go ahead and ask that out loud, please?
Well, I'll start as he's getting ready. Oh, is this form mandatory? I assume you're talking about the open houses. So Bruce, what if someone is coming to the open house, but they don't want to sign any form?
If they don't want to sign any form, then I would say that's not an option. If they're coming to an open house, at a minimum, they have to sign the sign-in sheet.
Yeah. So from now going forward, if you're like, oh, I'll let the, looky-loo neighbors come in the open house, they've got to sign the form because you don't even have the right to start talking to them about the house, selling the house without them having some agents, some relationship already established, right? Some agreement to how what we're doing, right? So.
And in fairness too, that's where we're at here on April 30th. By the time, this new form release happens in June, there may be subsequent, chatter out of CAR that says, forget about it. This isn't going to impact open houses.
And I will say this, NAR put out another questionnaire about this, about they call the term working with, am I working with or not, kind of the thing. But trust me, this is going to change a lot. Open houses is very gray right now. NAR is not even figured out in their negotiations exactly how that's going to play out. So as soon as we see more clarification out of NAR, we're going to see different forms hit out. But this is very fluid right now, so that's why there's 4 different forms. But suspect this is going to change a lot as we go forward. So we'll continue to have these trainings. Kind of say, oh, the open house forms changed a lot. Just know that's going to be there. But likely, as Bruce said, there's general consensus that anyone walking into open house will likely have to sign something. So.
All right. So I just want to make sure that the open houses I'm doing this weekend, we are going to need a form. Is that correct?
Okay. No. So just know everything we're talking about. Everything we're talking about is not going to kick in likely till July.
I understand that.
So we are we are not even changing our command checklist for this stuff. So just note this is what's coming down the pike. It will likely when the rules change passes, then we will inform you now this is in place. But we wanted to get you this in front of you because these are going to be like when they pull the trigger and the rules change, we're going to say now this is required, right? But now you can sign in normal on your open houses, but just going forward, none of these rules are in place unless NAR and MetroList adopt them, or the settlement is approved, or DRE and the legislature pass a law, right? So
all right.
And John, real quick too, I want to say these forms, once they go active, it'll happen in June. I don't know if it'll be the beginning of June, the middle of June, the end of June, but it will happen in June. And I'll be checking, CAR library regularly, looking to see if they've activated them yet. But what I would tell you as agents, as practitioners who use this stuff to earn your livelihood, it is really, really, I can't even tell you how important it is. Once these forms are finalized and released, don't just wing it the first time you have to use one. Look at these forms, print them out, study them, see what's in them, especially the BRBC, because you're going to have to go through that with your clients. And you don't want to be learning it as you go when you're sitting down with a client, because that's gonna totally mess up your credibility with them. You really need to internalize these things and understand them.
And Stephen Webb, Stephen T, just to let you know, these forms we're showing you are not even in your library yet. You can't even pull them up. They're not in there. We just know they're coming. That's what we're showing. So.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. Luke, you have a question?
Yeah, I got something to add to that and then a question. I mean, we got trained for all this during COVID when we had the PEAT forms and whatnot. When you were at open houses, you had to sign in. There wasn't an option. We're going straight back to that. It's not really changing anything. They have to sign in. It'll just buyers become adaptable.
And I can tell you as a business practice at our open houses, you sign in. If you don't sign in, you're not getting the house, right? So,
That's what I've been doing for years.
so like,
Um,
it's just about that's why I was saying when Bruce talked earlier, it's gonna make you more professional. You're gonna have to handle the objection of not signing in, and you're gonna have to handle it well, right? So,
I mean, most people, they do. I've every once in a while to kick a Karen out, and I don't have their business anyways. So
yeah,
what
that's the thing
business
is,
do they have in the house?
yeah, Mark, I've turned people away and they're mad and they yell at you, but like, do you really want that client? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't, right? Exactly. So, Luke,
So
you have a question?
yes, I have a question about this wooden balconies and stairs. That's supposedly getting implemented. What happens if you quite literally can't get an inspection? Because I know these people, I was a contractor before. You're not getting these people out for less than $1,000. And typically these are gonna be what, condos that are gonna be put
Yeah.
out there that are gonna require this?
Yeah,
What are we
like I said,
supposed to
there's
do
a
with
lot
that?
out there. I suspect, and this is just, I suspect the city or something is gonna put a certification program out where you kind of like get, like, if you're a contractor and licensed to do this, you can get certified to do these inspections. But yeah, I imagine they're not gonna be cheap, or as Bruce said, the HOA is gonna realize this is such a big deal that they're just gonna have a mass certification done on their units every year or something like that, just to
Yeah.
make it, just to make so that it can happen, right? But
That gonna make
there's gonna
HOA
be
dues
some
go up?
consternation at the beginning about how to get this resolved, right? So,
Yeah,
Is that-
and just to follow up, it's not supposedly going to be happening. This is now state law. It is happening January 1st.
So is this gonna mean that HOA fees are most likely gonna go up to cover this new cost?
there's a whole bunch of that I said, how the industry and HOAs are going to respond is going to be interesting. All right. So,
Fair enough.
Luke, you got a question?
Yeah, so I guess I'll change my question a little bit. With the feed form during COVID, with a group of 5 individuals that came into an open house, did you have to sign in every adult?
It would be every buyer, every potential buyer. So the agent's not going to need to sign in. But if the agent has buyers with a buyer broker agreement, there's one particular form he could use to bring with them where they say they're represented by, by him.
No, I'm sorry, I got a little distracted by my daughter. What I was saying is, like, if I'm doing an open house with this new form, right, this buyer sign-in form, I get a group of 5 adults that come in, they're all together. Do I need to literally sign every single adult in to the open house?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to get clarification on that. Sorry.
That'd be my feeling.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, because if they're all, say it's a family and they're all getting on the loan, you're representing all of them. You got to have a clear relationship with each of them. All right. So,
What about with like family members that are coming with family that's buying? So like I got clients that I'm showing houses to. She brings her daughter there regularly, but she isn't buying a house.
Yeah.
Do we have to get like a new agreement signed with her too to be able to see the house as well?
That's a great question. I would imagine you could use one of the non-agency forms.
yeah, I would suspect if they walk into your house as of now, they're writing it and say they're just a friend and they're going with them at the open house with the real buyer, then non-agency sign for them, right? So,
They still have to sign something.
at this point, they're saying if someone walks in, the standard is if someone walks in your open house
They
and
have
you're
to sign.
showing that home as an attempt to sell that home, you must have something written before they enter the home.
Wow. Okay.
We are all in uncharted territory on this. Even the attorneys at CAR, and so I think we have an idea where they're going with it with these forms that they've come out with, but nothing's final yet. And we can only work with what we have.
And just so you know, I suspect we'll have more clarification on how to handle open houses once this shakes out, and we'll have more trainings on this, right? But I imagine they're gonna only attempt to make it simpler, not harder, right? So,
Right.
So. Any other questions out there? Okay.
Wow.
Okay, everyone, thank you. We will continue to do this every few weeks just to make sure that we're on top of the forums. As Bruce said, they're changing rapidly and all the time. So we will make sure that we'll let you know about those happening and talk about those as they change. But thank you very much. We have recorded this. Bruce has also recorded a full in-depth analysis on all these forums. That link is there. We'll provide that. It's on our YouTube channel as well. If you want to go deep dive into these forums. Please note, these forums are not active right now. They will be active sometime in June or July. We will let you know, right? So
It's
And-
all
and-
in our private Facebook group as well. So they have different areas where they can access this YouTube video and the Google Docs as well.
Yeah, and please do pull down the docs, take a look at them. And you can even begin familiarizing yourself with them now, so that once these things are official, especially the BRBC, you will have a pretty good understanding of how it works.
Everyone's thanking you guys. For some weird reason, it's coming directly to me and not to everybody. So I'm
good
trying to
insight.
filter it
Thank
all.
you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate your
Thank
time.
you.
Hopefully this was helpful. Watch the recording, check out the forums. We appreciate you all. Go sell some homes out there. So
Yes,
Thank
listen.
you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.